Coming right up in Emoji Shooter Part 3, we're going to add explosions and use action objects for animations. Before we move on to adding the collision detection, go and find where you're moving your lasers on the screen and put list around self.lasers. This is going to create a copy of the list to go through, and it's going to prevent errors later on. To detect collisions between individual lasers and individual emojis, we need to use a for loop inside of a for loop. We already have a for loop sitting here, so we can just write our other for loop inside. Make sure you're at the correct indentation level, and now we're going to create a for loop that goes through all of the emojis. Now that we're inside two loops, we can do our if statement that detects if there's a collision between a laser and an emoji. Remember, sprite nodes have b-boxes, and b-box is a rectangle, and a rectangle has an intersects method that you can use. After I've written out the if statement, I need to write down what happens when there's a collision. So a couple of things need to happen. We need to remove the laser by doing l.remove from parent. We also need to remove the laser from the lasers list by doing self.lasers.removeL. Now we need to remove the emoji from the screen by doing e.remove from parent. And we also need to remove the emoji from the emojis list by doing self.emojis.remove e. As you can see, when you fire and you hit something, the laser beam and the emoji disappears. This would be a perfect time to play a sound. I'm going to use sound.playEffect to do that. I'm going to choose explosion number 3 from the arcade folder. Now I'd like to add some special effects. I'd like to add an explosion that fades away. To do that, we need to learn about actions. If you scroll up to the top of your code, you'll see that line number 5 says A equals action. That means instead of typing out action all the time, I can just type a capital A. We're going to create the explosion just before we start removing the lasers and the emojis from the screen. The first thing to do would be to actually create the explosion sprite node. Call it new explosion and create a sprite node with the explosion texture. You'll find that in the shapes folder, and I'm going to choose explosion number 4. Once the sprite node has been created, we need to set the position by using new explosion.position. And we're actually going to set it to the position where the emoji actually was before. So this particular emoji that's just been hit is called E, and we're going to find out what its position was and set the explosion's position to that position. Now the explosion is going to sit exactly where the emoji was. Now we're going to use self.addChild to add our explosion to the screen. At the moment, the explosion sprite nodes are a little bit too big, so I'm going to use scale to make them smaller. I'm going to use new explosion.scale and set it to 0.4. Now the explosions are a more reasonable size. At the moment, the explosions just sit there. What we want them to do is fade out. We're going to use an action to do that. I'm going to create a new variable called act. This is going to store our action object. The action object I'm going to create is a sequence by using a.sequence. You need to make sure you're using a capital A. Inside of the brackets, I can put as many actions as I like, and they're going to happen one after the other. The first thing I'd like to do is fade out. To create a fade out action object, you simply write capital A dot fade to, and then in brackets you write the alpha level you'd like to fade it to. In this case it's completely see-through, so 0, and then a comma, and then you write in how long you would like that action to take. I'm going to write 0.5 for half a second. After that, I'm going to write a comma. You need to make sure you're outside of the bracket. Then I'm going to write a.remove. That means after the explosion has faded to see-through, it's going to be removed. The last thing to do would be to go new explosion dot run action, and in the brackets we write down the action object we'd like to run on that sprite node, which in our case is called act. Now when we run it, we have a sequence that runs. The explosion appears on the screen and then it fades to see-through, taking 0.5 seconds to do that, and then it's removed from the scene.